most abandoned buildings are empty. At least, that's what people assume, but some places seem to hold on to something long after everyone leaves. Tonight, we're exploring one of the most infamous abandoned hospitals in the country, a place surrounded by decades of rumors. A place where urban explorers claim they've heard voices in empty rooms, seen figures standing at the end of hallways, and captured things on camera that shouldn't exist. We arrived at exactly 3:13 a.m. What happened next would become one of the strangest investigations we've ever experienced. And by sunrise, one member of our group would refuse to speak about this place ever again.
Come closer.
Midnight Archive found this one.
The hospital originally opened in the 1950s. For decades, it served thousands of patients, emergency surgeries, trauma cases, long-term care, and according to local records, a psychiatric wing occupied the entire third floor. Everything seemed normal until the late 1980s. That's when stories began appearing. Patients reporting strange voices, staff members refusing to work overnight shifts, security guards claiming they saw silhouettes moving through empty hallways. Most dismissed the stories as stress, exhaustion, overactive imaginations, but the reports never stopped. Eventually, the hospital closed its doors, officially due to financial issues. Unofficially, nobody really knows. The building has remained abandoned ever since, and that's where our story begins. The main entrance had long since collapsed. Rusted emergency doors hung partially open, swaying slightly despite the complete absence of wind. That was the first thing that unsettled me. The second was the silence. No insects, no distant traffic, no birds, nothing. Just a strange emptiness pressing against our ears. Marcus aimed his flashlight toward the shattered lobby windows. Tell me I'm not the only one getting a bad feeling about this place. Nobody answered. Not because we disagreed. Because every one of us was staring at the dark interior beyond the glass. And for a brief second, I could have sworn something moved inside. The three of us stopped walking. Nobody spoke. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of wind slipping through the broken entrance behind us. The footprints continued straight ahead into the darkness. Large boot prints, too large to belong to any of us. And there was something unsettling about them. The stride was perfectly even. No hesitation, no wandering. Whoever made them knew exactly where they were going. I aimed my flashlight down the corridor. The beam stretched across peeling walls and rusted doors before disappearing into blackness. Then I noticed something else. The dust around the footprints hadn't settled yet. Tiny particles still floated in the air, as if the person who made them had passed through only minutes earlier. And somehow, that realization felt far worse than being completely alone. About 10 minutes later, one of us glanced over his shoulder. Then he stopped walking. What happened to that wheelchair? We all turned. The hallway behind us was empty. The wheelchair was gone. At first, we assumed we had taken a different route. The hospital was a maze. Maybe we simply couldn't see it anymore. But then we checked the footage. The camera had captured the exact hallway behind us. Long, straight, completely unobstructed. There was nowhere the wheelchair could have gone. No side rooms, no intersections, nothing. Yet it wasn't there. The realization settled over us like ice water. Something inside the hospital had changed, or worse, something inside the hospital was moving when we weren't looking. From that moment on, every shadow felt alive, and every hallway felt like it was watching us. None of us spoke for several seconds. We simply listened, waiting, hoping to hear another sound that could explain what we'd just heard. Maybe another explorer, maybe an animal, maybe loose equipment falling somewhere in the building. But nothing came. The silence felt unnatural, like the hospital itself was holding its breath. I checked my watch. 3:13 a.m. The exact time several former employees had mentioned in old stories online. The time strange incidents supposedly occurred. Coincidence. At least that's what we told ourselves. Then our audio recorder emitted a burst of static. A sharp crackling sound that made all three of us jump. The batteries had been brand new, yet the device suddenly flickered on and off by itself. And somewhere above us, a door slowly creaked open. We didn't know any of this at the time. We continued climbing. The stairwell seemed to stretch on forever. Floor after floor passed beneath us. The beam from our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness above. Nobody was joking anymore. Nobody was talking. The mood had changed completely. Then we reached the third floor landing, the psychiatric wing. The door stood partially open, just enough to reveal a narrow strip of darkness beyond. What stopped us wasn't the door, it was the dust. A thick layer covered the floor around the entrance, and running straight through it were fresh footprints. The same footprints we had followed downstairs. Except these were different. These weren't heading into the wing, they were coming out, and they ended directly in front of the stairwell where we were standing. The room was almost completely empty. A rusted hospital bed sat against one wall. Broken restraints hung from the frame. Peeling paint covered the ceiling. Dust coated everything. Yet something felt wrong immediately. The room looked untouched. But the dust near the center of the floor had been disturbed, as if someone had been standing there recently, watching the doorway, watching anyone who entered. Then our flashlights illuminated the far wall. Words, hundreds of words, scratched directly into the paint, layer upon layer. Some too faded to read, others perfectly clear. The same sentence repeated over and over, dozens of times, maybe hundreds. "It's not on the third floor." We stared at the message in silence. Then, from somewhere deeper in the psychiatric wing, we heard a distant scream. The room looked completely different from the others. Most of the patient rooms had been stripped bare years ago. This one hadn't. An old hospital bed remained against the wall. A small suitcase sat near the window. Several photographs were scattered across the floor. And in the corner, a stuffed rabbit rested on a chair. Everything was covered in dust. Everything except the chair. The chair looked clean, recently disturbed, as if someone had been sitting there, watching, waiting. One of us slowly approached the photographs. Most had faded beyond recognition, but one image remained surprisingly clear. It showed a young girl standing in front of the hospital, smiling. Written across the bottom in faded ink were 3 numbers, 313. The same number displayed on the room door. Then the audio recorder suddenly activated. Nobody touched it. Nobody was standing near it. Yet the device began recording. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a voice appeared. Quiet, weak, almost impossible to hear, but unmistakably human. It said only 4 words. "He's still upstairs." The room fell silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because every person standing there knew the same thing. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else inside the building. Yet for several seconds, none of us moved. The corridor suddenly felt much longer than before, much darker. I swept my flashlight across every doorway, every patient room, every corner. Nothing. No place anyone could have hidden that quickly. Yet the feeling of being watched remained, stronger than ever. Then our audio recorder crackled to life. We hadn't touched it. The device had been sitting in a backpack, powered off. Still, a burst of static filled the hallway, followed by a sound that made our blood run cold. Breathing, slow, heavy, directly into the microphone. Not from beside us, not from down the hall, but from somewhere impossibly close. As if whoever or whatever we had just seen was standing right behind us. At first, we assumed it was a camera malfunction, a software glitch, something explainable. Then one of us checked his phone. No signal, no service. But the clock still worked. 3:47 a.m. Nearly 35 minutes had passed. Yet every recording device insisted it was still 3:13. That should have been impossible. Then we noticed something even stranger. The figure appeared in multiple clips, not just the hallway footage. Frame by frame, we searched through earlier recordings. There it was, standing at the end of a corridor, reflected in a broken window, partially visible inside a patient room doorway, always motionless, always distant, always facing a wall. And somehow, none of us had noticed it while filming. Nobody said a word. We simply stared at the ceiling, listening. The footsteps continued. One step, then another, directly overhead. The sound moved slowly across the surgical wing as if someone was pacing above us. That shouldn't have been possible. We had already confirmed the 3rd floor was the highest level of the hospital. There was nothing above us except the roof. Then the surgical lamp flickered harder. Once, twice, 3 times, and suddenly went dark. For a moment, the entire corridor was swallowed by blackness. Then our flashlights illuminated something new. Fresh footprints, appearing in the dust outside the operating room, one by one, as if someone invisible had just walked past us. Nobody in the room spoke. The tape continued to spin. A soft hiss filled the silence. Then the interviewer asked another question. "Does anyone else see him?" The girl laughed quietly. Not a normal laugh. Not nervous. Almost confused by the question itself. Well, of course they do. The interviewer paused. "What does he want?" Another few seconds passed. Then the girl's voice dropped to a whisper. "He listens." The tape crackled violently. For a moment we thought it had ended. But one final sentence emerged from the static. A sentence so clear it sounded freshly recorded. "He knows when people are coming." Then the cassette clicked off. And somewhere down the hallway outside the office, we heard a single heavy footstep. Nobody suggested opening the door. Nobody wanted to. Every instinct was telling us to run, to leave, to get out of the hospital while we still could. But fear has a strange effect on people. Sometimes it makes you flee. Sometimes it makes you look closer. The breathing continued, slow, rhythmic, as if something enormous was standing just beyond the doorway, listening, waiting. Then the steel door creaked wider on its own. A long metallic groan echoed through the corridor. Our flashlights illuminated the darkness beyond. At first we saw nothing. Then a shape emerged. Tall, impossible tall. Its head nearly touched the ceiling, and it wasn't walking toward us. It was standing completely still, facing the wall. Exactly like the figure we'd captured on camera. Then for the first time all night, it slowly turned its head toward us. The flashlight beams barely reached 10 feet ahead. Everything beyond that was swallowed by darkness. The deeper we descended, the stranger the stairwell became. The concrete walls gradually changed. Old hospital paint gave way to exposed stone, then brick. As if this section had existed long before the hospital was ever built. The footsteps returned. Not above us this time, below. Somewhere deeper in the darkness. One step, then another. Slow, heavy, deliberate. We stopped moving. The footsteps stopped too. The silence that followed felt unbearable. Then, from somewhere far beneath us, a voice echoed through the stairwell. Soft, almost whispering. "You're not supposed to be down here." And immediately after, a steel door slammed shut below us. First, it sounded like scratching. Faint, irregular, easy to dismiss. But it quickly grew louder, moving through the walls around us. Not in one direction, every direction, left, right, above, below, as if something was crawling through the structure itself. The sound stopped beside one of the morgue drawers. Silence followed. Then the metal drawer slowly slid open by itself, an inch, then another. The screech of rusted steel echoed through the room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Our flashlights remained fixed on the opening. Then from inside the drawer we heard a whisper, soft, barely audible, yet unmistakably clear. It spoke only 3 words. "He's awake now." And somewhere deep within the walls, something heavy began running toward us. None of us could explain what we'd seen. The shape had been visible for less than a second. Yet every one of us described it the same way. Too tall, too thin, and moving far too smoothly, as though it wasn't walking at all. The wall bulged outward slightly, then returned to normal. A moment later, the scratching stopped completely. The silence felt worse, much worse, because now we knew exactly where it was, somewhere nearby, listening, watching. Then our audio recorder activated by itself. A burst of static filled the morgue, followed by a voice, deep, distorted, almost mechanical. Only 4 words, spoken slowly, deliberately, as if addressing us directly. "I know you're here." Then every flashlight in the room went out at once. happened next was the most terrifying part of the entire investigation. The footage didn't end there, the voices didn't stop. And what we discovered deeper beneath the hospital changed everything we thought we knew about room 313 and the thing living inside the walls. But this story is already getting too long for one video. So here's the deal. If this video reaches 25 likes, I'll upload part 2 and reveal what happened after our flashlights went out. What we found in the hidden tunnels beneath the morgue, and why we left the hospital without all of our equipment. Trust me, the worst part of the story hasn't happened yet. Hit like, subscribe, and comment part 2 if you're ready for the rest.